it's Alyssa and this is Always Cinema Chic. So today we're gonna do a review and a discussion on the movie Capone that came out in May, but I just saw it about a week and a half ago. So Capone stars Tom Hardy as Al Capone, and then Linda Cardellini as May, his wife, and then there's also Matt Dillon as Johnny, one of his friends, and it's directed by Josh Trank, who did the movie Chronicle, but then also did the movie Fantastic Four. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I wanted to break this up in terms of what I think actually did work in the movie, what kind of worked in the movie, and then what didn't work at all. And so, I was so excited to see this when I first heard about it. And I remember reading all the posts on Instagram from Tom Hardy, hearing about the movie. I felt like I was there every step of the way. I was really super excited. I thought this was gonna be the movie where he gets an Academy Award nomination and perhaps actually wins for once. And so there was a lot of hope going into it. And then the pandemic happened and they said they were gonna release it straight to video. And I thought, oh, well, that's not the best sign ever, but maybe it's more of a indie movie and it will still be okay. And then the reviews came out and the reviews have not been kind, to say the least. I just went on IMDb and it's currently a 4.7 from reviewers. And we know that doesn't always mean everything, but when you get a 4.7, that usually is that's pretty bad. You're doing pretty bad to get a 4.7. So I went into the movie with very low expectations and I knew I was gonna watch it because Tom Hardy is one of my favorite actors and there's no way I'm gonna miss a new movie that he's in. But I just thought, okay, I'll go in, I'll watch it, I'm gonna know it's horrible. And I will say this, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be, so maybe it's a good thing that I went in with such low expectations. And if you go into this movie with really low expectations, you might actually find a few nuggets and a few things that are worth watching, or kind of like techniques that they use were kind of interesting, but it definitely misses the mark on a lot of levels as well. So I'm gonna go over first what I thought actually worked in the movie. So first of all, I liked the overall story and the overall approach. This is not to say that I necessarily thought every individual scene was a good choice, but I like the idea of focusing in on Al Capone's end of life when he's not that gangster, he's not that person that we would be used to seeing. And it in some ways reminded me of The Irishman. Now, I didn't like The Irishman. I thought it was incredibly typical. There was nothing different about it. The only thing I actually liked about The Irishman was the end. I thought the last 30 minutes were the best of the movie. And I remember saying to my husband when it came out, I wish the last 30 minutes was the whole movie. I wish that was the focus. And in a way, that's what Capone actually is. It's very similar to, looking back on this gangster's life and where he ends up in death and the fact that we all end up dead one day, right? So there was something about that idea that I found really fascinating. This movie does that, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it does it really well, but I like the overall approach to the story. So I felt like the writer-director had a good overall idea, and I would love the pitch of that idea, but when it came down to the nitty-gritty and the specifics, there were just a lot of inconsistencies in the film, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. But the second thing I really like about it is that it's not a traditional biopic. I would say out of every single genre that there is, I think biopics are my least favorite. Like, I really have a hard time sitting through them because they're so cookie cutter and they're just like, paint by numbers, and you just know the steps that those films are gonna take, and they're very literal. And what I liked about this is that it wasn't literal. There were a lot of abstract elements to it, which I wasn't expecting at all going into it. I thought it was going to be a very straightforward biopic, but it wasn't, and that was a nice surprise. But then I think of movies like Rocket Man, which did the same thing, and that worked. I mean, like, so infinitely better than this worked, because here's the reason: it kept a consistent tone throughout, and this movie definitely did not. There were moments where you thought, okay, this is just a regular serious drama, but then there were moments where it was super abstract and I didn't quite understand what they were going for in terms of tone. But getting into what kind of does work, it was those abstract sequences that it was maybe about 40 minutes into the movie that you see what is very apparently an abstract sequence. And the first one I thought was actually the one that was done the best, and you didn't really see it coming. And it felt like you were, delving into Capone's mind and you were going further down the rabbit hole, and what you were seeing you couldn't necessarily trust as a reality because it was all from his perspective, but it was able to show some of his past and some of his past experiences, but in a way that was very abstract, unrealistic, and put you in the perspective of someone who has dementia, someone who's trying to remember certain things, remember elements of a connection with a son that he had. So you're confused as the audience, but he's confused too. So I felt like that actually worked. And if they kept that sort of tone, or they let the whole film be from his perspective, and it was kind of, but the beginning doesn't really show you that in any way, shape, or form. And then you can go back and you could watch and you could see certain things that, oh, that was actually very much from his perspective, and which things were real and which things weren't real. But it didn't work because you started off with a very literal biopic feeling in the beginning, and then it just sort of flies off into something totally different, and you're like, all right, well, maybe if it's stuck that way from the beginning. Whereas with Rocketman, it was that way from the very beginning to the end, and I felt like that worked so much better in the film overall. The next thing that kind of works, I hate saying this, is Tom Hardy. He was good in it, right? And he is one of my favorite actors. Locke, I feel like, is one of the most underrated performances. I love that movie. I can watch that one over and over again, and he's been in so many things, from Warrior, and even though Legend may not have been the best movie, it was a little bit slow at times, his performance was just incredible as the Craze, and I watch that movie all of the time just so I can see that performance because it's so much fun. This one, there's interesting choices because it's Tom Hardy, and the voice to me was a very interesting choice. Al Capone obviously smoked cigars a lot, so yes, his voice would be very crackly, but there was something almost comedic about the voice, and it was hard to take the character seriously, whereas you could see that Tom Hardy was really going for it, and he had a very specific voice and he had very specific mannerisms in mind, and it did work. But there were times where I felt it was so over the top that I couldn't help but laugh. But then I was thinking, am I supposed to laugh? Like, is that the tone I'm supposed to be feeling right now? There's a scene with diapers where I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to laugh, but I'm still not like entirely sure if that's what they're going for, or if I'm supposed to take this seriously. It was a little all over the place for me to quite understand what they were going for. But his mannerisms in his physical acting I thought were really good. I am Italian, and his pronunciation was not perfect at times. And so hearing him do that pronunciation, it was embarrassing a little bit for me to watch, but it doesn't matter. I still love him. I'll love him always. He'll always be one of my favorite actors. And what I love about him is that he will always take a chance. He doesn't go for the easy performance. And I do feel like most of the time that works, but some of the time it misses. And this was one of those things where I felt like it's kind of working. I can see where you're going, but I think someone needed to rein him in. And I think Josh Trank was so in love with the fact that he was working with Tom Hardy on an Al Capone movie, and it just is all so perfect that he didn't rein him in. I felt like maybe they were a little bit like, they didn't want to insult each other because they liked each other so much. So they didn't necessarily say when something wasn't working. So, it's difficult for me to say that because I love him so much. And it's not that it was a bad performance. It was just an unusual performance. So, and here's what didn't work at all. There was definitely no consistent tone throughout the film. It went up and down. And so there were moments I'd be watching this movie and I'm like, this is actually good. I'm enjoying this. It's entertaining. It's a little bit more artistic than what I expected it was going to be. But then it would just go back to another kind of normal sequence. And I thought, oh, okay, what's going on? Like, if you're gonna be weird, just stay weird the whole movie. You don't have to kind of go back and forth. It just felt so inconsistent. The other thing that really bothered me, and I mean, it's a small thing, but maybe it's a big thing, is the makeup. I thought the makeup was really bad. And I remember on Instagram when they were filming the movie and Tom Hardy would put out all of the pictures of him with the makeup, and the way they did the lighting in those Instagram pictures, it looked so good and it looked really realistic to me. And then I saw the movie, I'm like, his face looks like plastic. Like, why does it look so bad? And I looked at Al Capone, the actual Al Capone, when he was 46, 47, and he didn't look as bad and as old as they made this Al Capone look. To me, he looked like he was 60 in the movie. It was just, he just looked so aged in the movie, where it kind of looked a little bit absurd to me. And once again, there was like that plastic sheen on his face that was not, I mean, it was just not realistic at all. And I couldn't believe people were making this movie and thinking this is some incredible makeup. And then you just think of the makeup for Colin Farrell in the Batman trailer and you're like, no, honey, that is makeup. That is makeup right there. So it's just, maybe it's a small thing, but to me, it adds so much to the character, and the fact that it was so unrealistic looking was really distracting, and I felt like it actually took away from Tom Hardy's performance as well, and I might have liked it more had the makeup looked actually more realistic. The other thing I wasn't crazy about was the acting for everyone else. I felt like it was just very cookie cutter acting for sort of a mob movie, and you know, I'm not really a fan of Matt Dillon. I don't think I really ever have been. I think he plays every character in such a similar way. His cadence is always the same. He doesn't ever change anything up, and his character is supposed to be a bit of a surprise in the movie, and it wasn't really a surprise at all, and his acting, I think, perhaps even gave some of it away. And so overall, as his friend Johnny, I didn't think he was exceptionally good. I did like Linda Cardellini in the movie in certain ways, because she did add quite a bit of heart to it, which she tends to do. She tends to ground movies when she's in them, and there was, you know, you got to see her perspective. You got to see the kind of abuse she endured from living with a man who has dementia, and the toll that takes on her, and trying to protect him and his legacy and the way everyone sees him, and making sure the rest of the world still sees him as this tough, strong guy. And so all of that was great, and her performance was very good. But once again, it's weird to have a sort of genuine, heartfelt performance when you're then pairing that against abstract images. And it was, once again, just an inconsistency in tone, which obviously I have to blame the director for that, because he should have seen how inconsistent everything was. The other thing that just didn't stand out to me, and I felt like should have for this type of movie, was the cinematography. When I watch a movie like this, I want the cinematography to sort of blow me away, especially in these sort of abstract sequences. And there were some shots that were interesting, and that's what made me upset, because it gave me hope that the movie could be shot really well, but then it wasn't. Once again, consistency. It wasn't that throughout the whole movie. So, you know, there were things that worked, and I'm actually glad that I watched this film. I'm not going to give this a grade, because I'm not going to say you should watch this movie, but at the same time, I'm glad that I did, because I thought there was enough in it that kept me engaged, and there were enough artistic scenes that made it worth it for me. But I can completely understand why people would watch this and hate it. So for me, I'm glad I saw it. I don't know how many times I'll see it in my life. I will probably watch it again for a laugh, especially one of the ending scenes where he's got a machine gun, and it's just, I mean, it's so wild and it's so over the top, and the image is just something that I will actually not forget. So it's like there's one of those images in film that I'm glad I saw. It's going to stick with me, so it was worth it for that, but the overall experience wasn't worth it at all. And I was really thinking about it, and it reminded me a bit of the movie Bronson, because Bronson is also a biopic, but it approaches the biopic in a very abstract way, but it does it with a much more consistent tone. And what was really interesting about that is I know Nicholas Winding Refn and Tom Hardy, they hated each other during the making of this movie. They couldn't stand each other. They were constantly fighting. But I actually think the fact that they were constantly fighting was a good thing, because it created a film that was very aggressive and rough, and that sort of kinetic energy and that hatred that they must have had for each other, it actually translated really well to film. Whereas here, I had just read an article that Josh Trank and Tom Hardy, they just, before they even agreed to do the movie, they hung out for 2 weeks and they were playing video games with each other. So they just became really good friends with each other first. And sometimes that can work and sometimes it doesn't, because I think if you're with someone who's your friend and something goes a little bit too far in one direction, you're gonna actually think they know what they're doing, and you're not gonna think to say anything. Whereas if you're not friends with that person, you might try to pull them back in some way or push them forward, and it might create an actual better piece of art. And I kind of feel like that's what happened here. Sometimes those friendships work. And just going back to Nicholas Winding Refn, he and Ryan Gosling had a really good relationship, and it worked so well for Drive. That just created one of my favorite movies of all time. But then they make Only God Forgives, and that's like, besides the cinematography, which I think is gorgeous in that film, it was just the opposite of everything Drive was. So I think sometimes working with your friend, it can work or it may not work. And I think in this case, it just didn't work, although there were enough positives. So that's where I'm gonna end it for today. Leave it off for you guys. If you saw this movie, if you saw Capone, please let me know what you thought about it. You can watch it, I believe it's on Prime right now for free. It's also on Canopy for free. So you definitely have access to it, which is also not a good sign, because that movie came out in May. So if you have access to it and it was available in August, it's probably not a good movie. So I would love to hear what you guys think, and I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.